Hello everyone, welcome to the today's lecture, which primarily is about the case study C, in which we are going to cover post-bureaucracies, organizational culture, and Morningstar. In this lecture, our prime focus will be to critically evaluate the claim that bureaucracies are being replaced with post-bureaucracies. So, since we discussed bureaucracies as well as different organizational structures last time around, we discussed how organizational structures differ based upon size, based upon strategy of the organization, as well as based upon technology. So we are going to see that how the theoretical concepts from bureaucracy are advanced into post-bureaucracy structure, into post-bureaucracy period, where the overall organization structure is driven based upon several factors. Moreover, we are also going to complexity of managing organizational culture, and we are also going to evaluate the Morningstar case study as a post-bureaucratic and strong cultural organizations. So primarily in this lecture, we will be covering the first part today, and we will be covering the other two parts on in the next class. Before we start with today's lecture, let's a quick recap to what we covered in the last 2 weeks. We talked about the history of management, in which we talked about systemization, we talked about legitimization, and we also talked about managerialization. In systemization, we covered that how management was playing their role, especially with respect to describing how certain things are going to be done, and we talked about Frederick Taylor there and his scientific management approach in systemization. We also made reference to Max Weber, where he highlighted that the hierarchical systems and roles and responsibilities attached to it is the best way of structuring an organization and managing people. Then we talked about legitimization, in which we covered that this was the time period when management uh, started developing their credibility, and we talked about two theorists mainly. Henry Fayol, who basically extended on the work from scientific management, and he introduced his 5 principles of managing as well as 14 principles of management. And then we talked about Mary Follett, who primarily uh, critiqued with Max Weber's top-down approach to uh, giving more authority with respect to expertise rather than giving it on the basis of merit. Then we talked about managerialization, in which we talked about uh, Mintzberg's work, in which he covered that the reality is slightly different from uh, what was being said by Henry Fayol, that what managers should do. He primarily focused on what managers are actually doing, right? He highlighted what kind of roles managers play, and then there was Peter Drucker, who talked about the decentralization as well, and he talked about some of the successful companies who were able to turn around the fortunes for themselves uh, because of the management techniques they used. And then we talked about organizational structure. We talked about the contingency theory, which was primarily based upon work of three different groups who proposed, like first, Alfred Chandler proposed, for instance, that strategy plays an important role that influence the organizational structure. And secondly, we talked about Joan Woodward, and she worked her way towards defining how technology influences organizational structure. And lastly, we talked about Aston School, who studied different organizations who differed in size, and they concluded that size plays an important role when we are structuring an organization. So, primarily, what we are going to cover today is, like, since we have talked about bureaucracy before, and we have talked about that it was during the time period of systemization. So now we are moving towards the legitimization and managerialization. So we are basically going to see that how post-bureaucratic structures were when they started realizing that human elements are becoming very important, and how that has essentially helped organizations moving forward and redeveloping themselves uh, to adjust with the changing need of business environment. So, with respect to post-bureaucratic organizations and bureaucratic organizations, we are going to look through the definitions of the two kind of organizations, and we are going to create a distinction between the two so that you can better understand the difference between bureaucratic and post-bureaucratic organizations. We are going to talk about different types of post-bureaucratic organizational structure that exist. I think if you have gone through the reading material that I asked you to go through before this lecture, so you must be aware with different type of structures that are there. We are going to talk about the characteristics of network organizations, which is one of the type of the post-bureaucratic organizations, and it is becoming quite important nowadays. And then we are going to talk about the advantages of post-bureaucratic organizations versus bureaucracies, and also we are going to evaluate the rise and future of BPO, which is very much important with respect to your examination as well. And the question that I have given you also develops from the critique that we are going to talk about with respect to post-bureaucratic organizations in this lecture. The remaining part, with respect to organizational culture, Morningstar, in conclusion, we'll talk about it in our Thursday class. All right, so when we were talking about the systemization phase in the last lecture, we talked about Max Weber being one of the founding members, primarily talked about how what would be the best way of managing people. Being one of the founding figures of organizational behavior, Max Weber, he was interested in a wide range of social and political questions in his time, for which he offered that there should be a radical authority assigned to the hierarchy so that everything is followed in an ordered approach. Roles and responsibilities were defined, and authority was the main differentiator at the hierarchical levels. Further on, we saw that this type of management was primarily associated with more mechanical approach, or where there was a production, where there was massive production, or where there was mass production or mass consumption was the main concept. So we also talked about when we were talking about Alfred Chandler that the organizations in the 20th century, they focused on more multidivisional or multifunctional roles or organizational structure when they expanded from one region or from one product line or from two product lines to several product lines or several different divisions or in several different geographical structures. So, in that scenario, bureaucracy or bureaucratic structures were making sense because the roles and responsibilities were defined, and it made it convenient for managers, like for several multiple tiers of management, to actually look after all the divisions and all the uh, geographical setups that organizations have. So there was in bureaucratic structure we had seen that there was a very strong sense of authority assigned at hierarchical levels, because of which boss or the top figure or the top management was primarily responsible for making sure that all the people working down or working within their authority or within their span of control are actually getting things done, right? So the post-bureaucratic uh, era primarily is considered as the 21st century era, and it primarily associates itself with the organization concept, with organizations started becoming global in a true sense, such that they were not limited producing in one place and selling at the other. They were primarily producing at various different places and were selling at various different places. So this is the time period when the globalization or customization of the product, as well as just-in-time inventory systems or productions and digital communication technologies started becoming. And this is the time period when the post-bureaucracy period primarily starts. Now, there could be several definitions defining that what a bureaucratic organization could actually be. But primarily, it could be categorized as a flexible or non-hierarchical organizations where everyone is responsible or everyone plays their part in fulfilling the responsibilities that are being assigned to them. Right? It becomes more. It's more of a structure where there are more peer-to-peer reviews where each person plays their like specialist. You can say has certain set of specialists working under him, and they do peer-to-peer review, and they all take the responsibility of reaching a particular goal. Further on, if we talk about post-bureaucracy, it is being highlighted that there are fewer managers in such organizations. We have also seen that the structures have uh, uh, gone beyond the uh, multi-divisional or multi-functional organizations, and a more network-based approach is being undertaken. More virtual organizations and corporations are coming along, where every person is primarily responsible for making sure they are uh, getting the tasks done and they are achieving the goal or objective for which the organization primarily organized people for. Further on, the consensus, dialogue, trust, and collaboration are the key features of such organizations, and these organizations are more open to organizational boundaries, and sometimes the organizational boundaries does not even exist or is faded out when different organizations primarily work together towards collectively achieving a goal, for instance in form of different joint ventures or in different collaborations to produce something. So organizations work beyond their own companies as well or own organizations as well, and they can actually come up together to form an organization in such a case. And as I said, the evaluation is primarily by the colleagues or peer to peer. It's more the people around you who evaluate you, and yeah, especially when there is going to be consensus and dialogue, and the element of trust and collaboration needs to be established. So it is important that the colleagues play a premium role or a clear role in evaluating how you're performing because you work as a part of a team or as a part of a group. With post-bureaucratic organizations, it is widely being observed that there are several different um, type of bureaucratic organizations that have started existing, especially when we talk about the 21st century. Like for instance, let's talk about mutual and cooperatives. Like for example, ownership is shared by all employees and decisions may be taken by means of direct democracy, right? So like these are the cooperatives where employees play a very strong role in the overall objective setting of the organization, and then they play a very important role in how organization is going to move forward with respect to their goals, their missions, their achievement. And yes, then again each of the employee is evaluating the other with respect to the fact that if some one person is doing wrong or if one person is underperforming, it is eventually impacting the whole organization. Um, Secondly, there are metric structures that have different functional and project-based lines of authority. Like for instance, you can take example with respect to the fact that like if you are working in any organization nowadays, for example, if we take example of schools, So each school is primarily, like for example, if you take example of your institution, so the management may be answerable, let's say, to the finance department, to the marketing department, or they may be reporting to the marketing department or finance department, as well as to the academic heads of a particular program section, like for example, UOL program section or Oliver program section. So they may be answering to the head of University of London programs, and they may also be answering to the head of school, who is primarily towards the administrative side, right? So a metrics organizations or metric structures are more of that structures where there are functional as well as divisional um, structures combined together, and you have more than one reporting lines, for instance. You can always um, read through the text, and we can talk about the advantages and disadvantages that exist in metric structures. Further on, we can talk about the companies operating as platforms as well, like for instance, where companies aim to use technology to provide customers with a service. Workers may be forced to be self-employed in such an economy, and the organization develops a powerful brand to attract customers without always offering the employment rights enjoyed by those working in bureaucratic organizations. So, like for instance, there are several organ platforms that are working at the moment as well. We can take example of, let's say, uh, uh, there's several platforms, like for example, Amazon's platform is there, and a lot of people are actually working on that platform, but they are not employed by Amazon, but they are working in association or in partnership with them, right? So they don't have those employment rights, but they work for them. Likewise, there are many open source platforms where a lot of people primarily enhance the features offered by a particular program. Like for example, if we talk about Magento is one of the open source platform for it provides an e-commerce solution, right? So it's an op it so if people are developing different uh, modules for it, or if they're developing different functionalities for it or features for it, so they're primarily working for the company. They are improving the product, but they are not actually employed by them. They get their share, and that's it. Like, if they're selling a particular feature, they get the fees for that, but Magento is also earning because of that. And then again, there are virtual organizations are existing as well. The organizations which are not geographically connected, or they are not physically together, and people are working at geographical centers. Like, for example, many companies in Pakistan and India and in Bangladesh, uh, they are like you guys must have heard about business process outsourcing. So that is kind of a virtual organization that exists now. Like if you have been to the European countries, and if you are calling, let's say, your insurance provider, so the call center may actually be in India. So they are actually part of, like, you expect that you are talking to your insurance provider, but those organizations are actually representing your insurance providers and are not actually part of the direct part of or directly liable for them. So they are just providing them a service. So virtual organizations, people don't actually they work remotely. They work towards a common cause, which they build towards a common goal, and they just try to achieve that. So virtual organizations is becoming quite popular form of organizations nowadays as well. And in such organizations, usually there are no structures, or there are very little structures, or there is very limited positions, and a lot of work is divided based upon the availability or based upon the skill set of somebody. So you may start noticing, like with respect to organizational structures that we studied previously, that, for example, the role of labor or the need for specialized labor is changing as well as we go along the post-bureaucratic organizational structure. Likewise, the main structure that we highlighted in our previous slide as well was the network structures. So network structure is primarily a structure where there is no hierarchy at all. If you can define it into a hierarchy, it's actually not a network structure. So network structure is a core organization coordinates an ever-changing set of legally and geographically separate organizations in pursuit of very clear goals. These organizations are those organizations who have very they have the core people, they have core specialities, and they have core organizations working for them. And those core organizations divide the task among themselves and they work towards achieving that task. And lastly, there are family businesses. Family businesses are it's like in the 21st century, it is again becoming very popular. Like we discussed it when we said that there are bureaucratic structures. When we talked about Max Weber, we said that we primarily ended the family structures. We primarily said that there shouldn't be family structures, and instead we should let it be on the basis of merit. But post bureaucratic organizations have started seeing family businesses becoming a backbone to a lot of economical to a lot of economic prosperity in many different developing and developed countries as well. Like for instance, there was a research about China where it was concluded that more than there were about I think there was 80% of their GDP was actually uh, um, backed by the businesses. Out of it, 60% was family-owned businesses. So like in family-owned businesses, it's pretty clear that there are no defined hierarchies. But yes, the top positions primarily belongs to the elderly or to the top family person, right? Likewise, the top management positions are divided amongst them as well, regardless of the merit or regardless of the capacity of that person. But it has been seen that in family businesses, people do put in a lot of effort to make sure that their family businesses survive, and all of them primarily work towards improving their businesses. So, it is being argued like since they own the business themselves, so they are more likely to take decisions which are in the best interest of the organizations. So family-based structures has started working as well. So and it constitutes of one of the major post-bureaucratic organizational structure. Okay, when we're talking about post-bureaucratic organizations, network as a primary form of structuring an organization that plays a very important role. So let's discuss the main characteristics of networks as this form of this could even form the part of the examination question. So when we're talking about the main characteristics of networks, like for example, we say that decentralization of authority and responsibility is considered as the primary motive, or is considered a primary element when it comes to characterizing the network organizations. And it could be defined by the horizontal connections between individuals and groups of equals rather than vertical connections internally. In order to understand better what the network organizations could actually be operating as independent organizations, but they primarily work together towards achieving a particular goal. And they have people within the organization and outside of the organization as well who are their stakeholders, and all of them primarily plays their part in order to make sure that whatever the common goal of the organization is, it could be achieved. Like for instance, if we take the example of Walmart, they ask the local people as well as the people outside the organization to work towards the achievement of the goals with respect to the organization's approach towards sustainability, approach towards reusing the material. So these links can be voluntary as much as formal. Like for example, we can also take example of Apple. Apple, if you look at iPhone primarily contains one of the world's best parts from the best suppliers. Like the screen is designed by Samsung, the the lens is designed by Sony. So they are primarily, it is kind of a network organization where they are collaborating with their internal designs as well as the externally what is best in the market, and they are collecting that together to form a product that primarily work towards being one of the best product in the world. So tasks are broadly defined and span of departmental and geographical boundaries are dismantled, and a web kind of network is created. And many people can assume leadership roles depending upon whatever part they are playing. And yes, for network organizations where there is going to be sharing of roles and responsibilities, there's a definite need to develop trust, support, and it needs to be critical with respect to who is going to take what particular role in order to ensure the targets are achieved. Communication, both formal and informal, is high and two-way, and this also corresponds to the supply chain methodology nowadays, where the information or data primarily flows the either way. So network need people who are flexible, team-oriented, and task-focused, and who are good decision makers. Because authority is not defined by hierarchy. Authority is dismantled to different uh, individuals who are working within that network organizations. So authority is derived instead by knowledge and skill, and not because of hierarchy that exists. As we move towards evaluating the post-bureaucratic organizations, it is an important distinction that you need to understand that all the advantages of post-bureaucratic organization as well as the advantages of bureaucratic organization are primarily a perspective. So be sure that whatever perspective you are taking, you should be able to provide a reasonable critique to justify your point of view. For example, the advantages of post bureaucratic organizations include the flexibility, whereas the advantage of bureaucratic organization includes stability. So, primarily, in all the circumstances, flexibility is not what you need. But in other circumstances, stability is not the right answer a, to a changing organizational environment. So we need to understand that when we are saying that it is the advantage of post bureaucratic organizations that they are flexible, so we need to link it with the changing external environment or changing business environment or changing business factors for which organizations need to be flexible in order to quickly cater to the market demand or changes in market or changes in demand or changes in factors determining demand. So flexibility also results in organizations becoming more responsive with respect to very important changes in the business environment. For example, you guys must have covered Pastel analysis, so there could be several factors that can eventually influence an organization and how they are being structured. So, like for example, if an organization decides to completely shift what they were producing before, like for example, Nokia was once known for making toilet papers, and they shifted was one of their business making toilet papers, and they shifted altogether to making mobile phones. So they need to respond. They need to be flexible. They need to respond to changing market demands. Like for example, organizations who have invested a lot of time and resources and um, uh, research and developed into, like for example, camera technology. So the camera technology is evolving to a level that now mobile phones have seen more progression compared to DSLR cameras. So you need to be responsive to the changing needs of the organization. So it also allows the flexibility and responsiveness. Also, ask organizations to be more innovative. But then again, it's not necessary that all organizations are innovative. Like for example, we have talked about family-based structures as well. You don't expect them to be innovative. So it's important to understand that in what context are you referring to these advantages. Then again, there could be more constructive conflict resolution. Yes, that is primarily the requirement of network organizations, for example. So unless they are not going to resolve what the issues are, like for example, if you could relate to the case of Note 7 failing a couple of years back, then primarily it resulted in failure and losses for all of the concerned parties. So there's a need for conflict resolution. They need to decide that when they need to withdraw the phone and minimize their losses and save their reputation. So these are the things which companies need to understand. In post-bureaucratic organizations, the focus primarily remains upon providing customers with personalized treatment, because customers are the ones who are evaluating the effectiveness of the organizations. And if customers are evaluating, you need to empower your workers so that they can take decisions based upon knowledge that they have at that particular point when the decision is supposed to be taken. Like for instance, if you are at an airport and there are certain circumstances, let's say, where you have to carry extra baggage or something, or there could be some extraordinary circumstances with respect to uh, the conditions at the airport, or it could be a terrorist attack, or it could be anything. So, are you going to wait for the rules that are being assigned to the particular position you are, or you are going to respond based upon what needs to be done? So you need to empower your workers to sometimes take decisions that are required. For example, to savor the overall um, organizational perspective. Like for example, I shared the example of Coke deciding to becoming the happiest brand in the world. So they need to empower each of their division, each of their manager, each of their worker to make sure they all could contribute to it in a particular way. Because it's not just that they want to become the happiest brand, they want to become the successful brand as well. So some of them are contributing to helping them become the happiest brand, while some are helping them to become the successful brand. And likewise, there is a need for rapid development of skills. Without the rapid development of skills, how do you expect employees to get empowered? How do you expect employees to have the skills and knowledge to take necessary decisions at that particular time? So you don't just need to empower them, you need to develop their skills as well so that they have the knowledge to take the right decisions. On the other hand, if we look at the bureaucratic organizations, we can always say that bureaucratic organizations are more stable, they're consistent, reliable, and efficient. Efficiency is once again constructive. It depends upon in which context you're talking about. And then again, bureaucratic structures work in certain organizations, it doesn't work in certain type of organizations. Like for example, um, if it's a technical organization, or if it is more mechanical in nature, or if it is producing certain kind of materials or certain kind of products that are highly mechanical, there could be a need to have a more bureaucratic organization. Or for instance, where public stakes are higher, there isn't a where like for example, we primarily relate bureaucratic structures to the public sectors, because there the stakes are primarily the welfare of the people, not the maximization of wealth. So that's why we do question their efficiency at times. But then again, it depends upon the circumstances we are talking about. So we usually have a stable workforce because it is already roles and responsibilities. The responsibilities are being defined, and sometimes people prefer certainties. People prefer work knowing, like they will be getting pension at the end of the retirement period, and what their retirement period are, and for whether their job is secure or not. So there's a more stable workforce in bureaucratic organizations because people just adopted the system and work. And there's planned development of skill. There is not rapid development. They have certain trainings that are only associated to the positions. Like for example, if you reach managerial level, you are entitled to XYZ trainings, and if you become the deputy manager or senior manager or something higher than the manager, you will be entitled to different kind of uh, trainings. Now, the following question, like are post-bureaucratic organizations a new phenomenon or not, is very important with respect to forming your argument when you are talking about a question related to post-bureaucratic organizations, like especially if you are talking about its importance today or if it is a new phenomenon. So as we have seen so far, we have seen some radical shift from a more organized approach to a different type of organization when we have discussed how things have moved between bureaucratic to post bureaucratic organizations. And we have primarily talked about that post bureaucratic organizations are becoming popular in the 21st century. But this does not mean that it's a completely new phenomenon. Burns and Stoker appear to have discovered the post-bureaucratic organization over a half a century ago. Uh, like in the 50s and 60s, they discussed already that they divided the organizational structure on the basis of an organic structure or a mechanistic structure. Organic structure was more like the post-bureaucratic organization, and the mechanistic structure was more about the bureaucracy. I will share the chart with you, which will primarily talk about the organic as well as the mechanistic uh, organizational structures, and you can draw comparison with respect to how they both differ in the way the organization is structured. If you briefly skim through the organic structure which was proposed by Burns and Stoker, he said that there is a more contributive nature of knowledge and experience to common tasks. Like this primarily uh, pertains to the post-bureaucratic organization characteristics. Adjustments and redefinitions of tasks through interaction and communication points out to the fact that peers they primarily form consensus in order to define roles and responsibilities of what is going to be done by which particular person, and network structure for control, authority, and communication, and knowledge located anywhere in the network. So lateral outlooks and communication, information and advice, commitment to common tasks, value contacts with external centers of expertise, all these pointers link to the fact that the post-bureaucratic organization is primarily not a new phenomenon. It is something which was being discussed by Burns and Stoker in 1960s. This leads us to an important question, that is, do post-bureaucratic organizations represent the future? That is, whether the post-bureaucratic organizations are there to last, and while the most more organizations are going to adopt such organizational structures. Well, there are three types of views on it. First is the emergent view, which, as the name suggests, is primarily about that most organizations will and should become post bureaucracies. This primarily talks about the fact that more and more organizations are going to look at each other's success and are going to realize that in order to respond to the changing need of globalization, in order to respond to the changing need of people, and to stay profitable, it makes more sense that they follow what is becoming more and more successful. And for that, they are going to look at the organizations who are already successful and are following post bureaucratic structures and are going to focus on becoming one of them. It will become a more self fulfilling prophecy as consultants sell the idea of post bureaucracies as the future. Like, for example, if there is any bureaucratic organization, like, for example, and even in Pakistan, we have seen more and more of the publicly held organizations who were previously working for the welfare of the people are being asked to privatize because they have been operating in losses. So, primarily, the post bureaucracies are expected to bring back the efficiencies which are being compromised in bureaucratic structures recently. Because of the changing needs, they hadn't been flexible, and the lack of flexibility has resulted in with lack of responsiveness, and eventually it has started resulting a lot of organizations, especially working in the public sector, resulting in a loss making hits. So it is going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy because whenever these organizations are going to hire consultants, that is the first thing they are going to recommend them. Moving forward, it may happen that due to organization copying each other, which is the phenomenon called mimetic isomorphism, in which organizations see and they copy each other's processes in order to become as successful as the other ones. The second view is the skeptical view, which primarily believes that most organizations will not become post bureaucracies. Well, that once again is a point of view which needs to be backed with respect to the fact that what are the advantages or what are the disadvantages of changing from bureaucratic structure to post bureaucratic structure. Well, once again, this view does need to be backed by some common logic or by some strong argument with respect to why do you believe that organizations will not become post bureaucracies. Not only this view is more skeptical, that is less realistic and is more less likely to be realized. All the organizations, when they are primarily operating with the motive of maximizing the shareholders' wealth, they are going to realize that the post bureaucratic structures are profitable or are working towards improving the overall financial figures of the organizations, they are going to move towards it. However, of the three views, the most practical or the most realistic is the hybrid view, which primarily believes that the organizations may embody some bureaucratic as well as some post bureaucratic elements in order to become more successful. Well, there is a need of consistency as well as some reliability, along with the flexibility and responsiveness of post bureaucratic elements. So now, when organizations are planning to shift from bureaucratic structures to post bureaucratic organizations, the most important thing to consider is whether organizational culture is strong enough to back that paradigm shift or not. This is where we are going to discuss the organizational structure as well as we are going to discuss the case study Morningstar in order to understand that how important is organizational culture in post-bureaucratic organizations to completely adopt the shift to a new paradigm where flexibility and responsiveness as well as the ideology of lying the power with the worker who has the knowledge and skills is important. This brings us to the end of today's lecture. Uh, Now you guys should research about some examples of different PBO structures which we have talked about in this presentation, including network organizations, family-based organizations, virtual organizations, and you should create a list of examples for yourself, and you should use them in your answer to the assignment for this week, which is due on Thursday. Thank you.